This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hey, man. It's, what is it, 1:45 right now? On a Wednesday. Everyone's gone to bed and just trying to take advantage of this rare moment of peace and quiet to send you a voice note on Acasă documentary I watched tonight on your recommendation. So just for context, you've sent me a voice note earlier this evening, brief one. And when we watch movies that we like, that we want the other one to watch, we kind of try and give them a nudge, but not really set it up too much, not build high expectations, not say, you got to watch this fucking movie, it's amazing and you won't believe it, complete head fuck, whatever. We usually try and keep it as subtle and subdued as possible, our recommendations. So and you're brilliant at that, so I'll never fault you for it, but this is definitely a case of even the tiny minimalist way that you phrased it has I've sort of very incorrectly read between the lines and come away thinking that this movie was going to be quite different than it turned out to be. So I believe I'm going to slightly misquote you here, but you said something along the lines of I watched this movie, you're best off watching it without reading anything about it beforehand, just going in blind, but you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it, definitely. I think you said the word enjoy at least twice in a very brief voice note. So I'm thinking, okay, so it's an enjoyable movie. It's like, a Knives Out or something like that. Whether you think it's the best movie ever made or not, that's different, but it is just like solidly enjoyable. And don't read anything about it beforehand. Okay, so it's like it's a bit of a surprising, it's a bit of maybe there's twists involved. Maybe it's like it seems to be one thing initially, but actually like it's a whole different type of thing, like high concept sort of thing. Now I did know it was a documentary, so that grounds some of that a bit, but still, I thought it was. I thought, you know what, I'm tired. It's the end of a hump day, and I'm sat there on the couch. And I said to the wife, we watch a movie? And I threw it on, thinking that it was, this is going to be just like, a good old popcorn fest. Now, within seconds, it's like, okay, this is not what I had in mind. It is essentially about one family, about a Roma family. We really don't see the Roma community at large. But it's about a Roma family that's been living in what we learn is a national park on the edge of Bucharest. There's the kind of title shot of the film is a big drone shot, which kind of starts at their little shack, their little hut that's in the middle of like a kind of grassy swampland, and then kind of tilts up to reveal that they're right beside Bucharest, this giant city. And by right beside, I'm talking about like it's a one of those classic like green borders where clearly development hasn't been able to pass a certain point. I believe it's a river, or maybe it's not a river, it's a motorway. I can't quite remember, but there's like a definitive border between the city and this natural kind of wilderness area where like on one side of that border, it's like extreme urban development, like high-rise buildings, and then it's just grass. So they've been living in this grassland And we learn that the father who first sort of struck out there has been there for 18 years, and he has 9 children. We follow them all to varying degrees, but the one that we follow most is the eldest, who turns 18 in that movie. So we can imagine this father has kind of gone out there with his wife and started a family immediately. And the kids have, all of the kids have lived out their entire life in this area. And it's clear from the get-go that they're living in extreme material poverty. And I say material because I think this film definitely makes a case for spiritual wealth or just quality of life. They're very poor by our society's standards. They're very poor by our kind of capitalist civilization that you and I are a member of standards. But they don't exist within, or they don't mostly operate within a hierarchy of different wealths. They're kind of off on their own. It's almost like saying that like people in a tribe in the Amazon are poor. It's like, are they poor? I mean, are they poor within their sphere of existence? But definitely, if you're sort of viewing the film and you're comparing the way they're living to the way that we live, it's immediately, okay, this is a family of, what, I guess 11 people all living in this tiny little dirty room piled on top of each other. It all looks pretty hectic. There's trash everywhere. And my wife really struggles with, especially if there's kids involved. Even if there's not kids involved, it's still not that's not what she's putting on herself. But especially if there's kids involved, she really struggles with media that's about hardship, like real. I'm not talking hardship as in like triumph in the face of adversity type stuff, like the pursuit of happiness. I'm talking like, actual real stories about, let's say, like heroin addiction or, extreme poverty and child abuse and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that's in this film, but you know what I mean? It's like she generally, at the end of the day, wants to throw in a movie that's escapist and, doesn't have to be Lord of the Rings or something, but something a little bit more, what most people would use the word enjoyable to advertise. So yeah, I was straight in the doghouse like within about 30 seconds of this movie. She got her phone out, started like, I really don't know what I said. Well, I can turn it off and switch something else. She's like, no, keep it on. She did get drawn back into it then and ended up watching the film with me. And yeah, it's a good documentary. I didn't realize this as I was watching it, but just looking it up online now, I realized it was released in 2020. I don't know when it was filmed. Like, I don't know when it ends, if you will. It could be 2019, but it could also be like 2017 or something. Like, sometimes these things take a long time to edit and are floating around film festivals until they get a buyer or something. But it's just interesting seeing the date 2020 now on this, because it's such a immersive depiction of these people living their life in, like, on the sort of fringes of society and of an urban landscape and everything. And of course, we know then how all of that changed in March of 2020. You could almost have made a sequel to this that starts directly afterwards and goes like, what happens when there's an extreme event like a pandemic that affects everyone? What happens to the already disenfranchised members of society? I know there's a lot of talk about homeless people during the pandemic, and these people are kind of like borderline homeless. And I guess I think Acasă means my home. The film is ultimately about the concept of home and the reality of home, like literally your abode. and inspired some interesting conversation between me and my wife. I think from a filmmaking perspective, it's very fly on the wall. There isn't necessarily a huge amount to say about like editing decisions or ways things are shot. Like I think a lot of the time it does look quite good. It looks quite, considering it feels pretty uncontrived in a way. Like it genuinely feels like the camera people are just like following them and filming what actually is happening, considering, and I could be wrong about that, of course. It's all, I wasn't there, but it seems very authentic. And so it's then a credit to the film that it does manage to capture quite a lot of like well lit shots and quite atmospheric moments, quite cool looking shots here and there, but they don't break the sort of boots in the ground, almost like journalistic aesthetic that it also has. But yeah, I think mostly my takeaway from the film is just the thinking about the events of it rather than thinking about the filmmaking. We've watched a film called Commune recently, which was also a documentary, and I think the conversation it inspired between us was mostly about the themes and the concept. Again, like we're both, I think, quite interested in how can you live your life? How can you live in or on planet Earth? How can you live as a human, either amongst humans or just, incidentally near humans? Like we think a lot about the extent to which we enjoy or want to subscribe to the kind of status quo society and what other options are available. And I'm not saying that in the case of Commune, which is a sort of movie about hippie commune, it's people who have come from, I suppose you could call it mainstream society, and then they've gone, no, let's do this other thing. Whereas this movie is about people from the Roma culture, a nomadic people who have been living maybe not exactly like this in terms of like the kind of isolated shack that doesn't seem to be particularly far away or particularly near to other Roma families. It's like their specific setup feels to my very uneducated eyes to be somewhat unique, but it's also quite similar in many ways to ways in which the Roma live. And so they're not radically making a choice to live an alternative lifestyle in a way, or at least that's my takeaway. I've been to Romania. I've spent a little bit of time in Roma communities there. I mean, the country is incredibly divided between the Romanians, Hungarians, and the Roma, and they're not hanging out with each other, intermingling as well, especially not the Roma. They're very sort of removed from the rest of the country, or at least that was my experience of it. But when I did a little bit go into those communities, it looked visually like this, except not in extreme nature where it's just one shack on its own. But it's interesting watching this film as someone who is from mainstream culture or society. I mean, I don't know what the best terminology to settle on is for this, but like I'm someone who's like, I live in a house, I'm sat on a couch, I work a job, I got a bank account, I go on the internet and watch Netflix and stuff. You know what I mean? Like I'm almost supposed to say like I'm normal, but like that's not the right way of putting it. But basically, I'm like most first world people. I'm a very average person in that regard, in the way that I live my life. But these guys are very alien to me, but also like this film probably captures a lot of like just what it is like being part of the Roma culture that's obviously existed for hundreds of years, if not thousands. I'm not sure how far it goes back. And then watching that as an outsider, which I guess the documentary filmmakers are as well, you're mostly kind of contemplating this question of, well, what was better for them? And it's like any question about how to live your life, it's incredibly complicated because it can't just be reduced down to one factor. There's also the hyper specific factors of like them as individual personalities. But at the beginning of the movie, and this could be documentary magic, rose tinted, like reductive romanticizing or whatever, but at the beginning of the movie, you see a lot of happiness, not across the board happiness, because the parents seem unhappy, but a hell of a lot of people in our society are unhappy a lot of the time. Like if you just walk down any street in any first world country and you go into like a random family home, there's a very good chance that the parents will be like not buzzing, right? Dour faces, bit grumpy, bit downtrodden, they might go through a lot of their days without much merriment, if any. So the fact that the parents in this family don't really exhibit much joy or joie de vivre is not like, I don't think, some like terrible indictment of their quality of life. The kids are incredibly happy. The kids are all awesome in this. I mean, they're such sweet kids and such nice people, the kids, like right up to the eldest. And then when they are kind of forced, like they're the forceful eviction from this, where they're living, where they've been living for 18 years, and they're moved to a society that they're naturally incompatible with. I'm not saying that that the whole enterprise of relocating them and stuff, it doesn't have, it may have altruistic or good intentions, and it may also be something that had a high chance of success, but it doesn't really look like within this film that it works in a positive way. Again, this could just be the way the documentary wants to present it. I don't think their life was utopian beforehand, and I think that I can understand like a council or a social service or whatever going, well, these kids can't they can't read, they can't write, they're not going for any, they're not like registered with a doctor, they don't have any, they're not being equipped with the tools to, like with any tool, sort of state sanctioned tools. They're sort of feral. How are they don't stand a chance of ever being able to become a part of our society. But then at the same time, it's like, well, do they need to? Like, like, it's very, very complicated question. I mean, and that's why I said that watching this film, like, you're mostly just prompted to consider very difficult questions. I think to a lot of people, these are not difficult questions. These are very easy question answers. Like, of course it's neglectful for them to not be able to read and write and not be going to school. Like, what are you fucking talking about? Like how could you ever suggest otherwise? And I think, well, look, school is designed to turn us into worker bees for this capitalist society that we live in. That is the whole, like, school isn't designed to like enrich your thirst for knowledge and it's not designed to give you some sort of like beautiful, rewarding relationship with learning and discovery, or like deepen you in a philosophical way that makes you, that like opens your mind and makes you more of a free thinker or something. Like it is just there to, it's a revenue driven enterprise that's there to make you, to maximize your yield as a member of society for the betterment materially of all, right? That's what it is. So like being that for most of human history, most people couldn't read, right? They couldn't read and write. It's only quite recently that maybe a majority are able to read and write. I'm not even sure if that's the case now, but in the first world, let's say in the country of Romania right now, obviously the vast majority of people can read and write. But it's not like for hundreds of thousands of years, people have been unhappy and suffering because they weren't able to read and write. Like if they are living within a culture that is not part of the kind of cultural cachet or the currency required to operate within it, and you don't need to, like, you know, when they go to school, let's say the little kids who are actually going to school, like I think the youngest kid is 4 maybe, like they're going to school at such a young age that they're probably going to get a full education right all the way up if they stick at school. Like that's going to massively benefit them if they choose to, or if they end up living outside of the Roma community. But if they continue to live within the Roma community, is knowing chemistry and geography and stuff like that really adding much value? I mean, at the beginning of the movie, they seem to be, they have this really shabby lifestyle that I don't think you or I could like transition to. I don't think many people from mainstream society could make a go of it living like that. Like I would feel so dirty. I'd feel like there was fucking like lice in my hair and like fucking like dirt under my fingernails, and like I couldn't live like that. Like what we see of that, like 11 people in one little room all piled up on top of each other, wearing the same clothes you've been wearing for weeks, and all this. Like it's just, I couldn't make that move, but I should. But that's because I'm not from that culture. We're forcing them. I'm saying now I'm starting to speak like it's like just a bigger. I'm not even talking about the family anymore, but the movie depicts the sort of forcing of people from another culture to assimilate into a culture that we have deemed to be superior, safer, more well-rounded. This is obviously was a huge argument for colonialism, the white man's burden of like, we have to civilize these people to save them from this terrible, unsafe and dangerous and savage lifestyle that they had previously. And, you know, I mean, you could, like this, they happen to be living like a 3-minute walk from a giant city, but I don't think it's necessarily all that different from if you went into the middle of the Amazon and you like told some tribe, yeah, game over, like we can't do this anymore. We need you to start working in banks, wearing suits and stuff like that. It's I find it quite arrogant. The even if it's well intentioned, and even if the individuals looking at the situation are coming from a positive place, I think it's an incredibly complicated enterprise. And this is one of the reasons why I haven't become a social worker. My father was a social worker. A lot of people I know are social workers. It's definitely something that has sort of floated around me in my life, and has sort of come across my desk as a possible path to go down. But it is so incredibly complicated to take on the management of other people's lives. We see in this film the father is a bit of a tyrant. Again, I think it is unfair to watch a documentary film and then claim to know the truth of the matter, because it's an edited, like curated and presented package that may or may not depict the actual reality of the situation. So with that caveat said, and obviously everything I'm saying is just what I've observed in this documentary, he seems to be a layabout. He seems to be callous and just a bit of a douchebag, like within this film. And like, I don't think the kids seem like they're really benefited by having him as a father. Like, I'm a father myself, and obviously I think endlessly about if I am positively impacting my children, if when they're, out in the world as fully fledged adults, will it have been a credit to them or to their detriment that they have me as a father? And not that that's a binary, but like, to what extent I will have kind of equipped them well in life. And I think these kids seem to have blossomed and done really well, but it might be thanks to their dad in terms of where he positioned them, that he sort of squirreled them away from society and built this shack and allowed them to have this like Jungle Book kind of upbringing. But doesn't seem like it's that they benefited much from like the day-to-day interactions with him. He just doesn't seem like a great person. But at the same time, like, you always have to, remember that what was his upbringing like. We're only able to do what we're able to do, and it's very difficult to know like if he's failing within the parameters of what he was likely to have achieved. It's also interesting, like tracking like what age he is, because we see, I'm forgetting the names of I've only watched it about 2 hours ago, but I've already forgot the names of all the characters. But the eldest son is having a kid at the end of the movie. He's 17. His partner is 15. She's pregnant and ends up having the kid. And I think she says, your parents were about the same age when they had us, but it doesn't feel like the father is only like our age. He looks older than us. He looks older than like mid to late 30s. Now, it could be hard living. I also find Roma people, like their features are often quite angular and stuff, and maybe they just have a sort of face type that looks older than it is. And like, if you're out in the elements and never kind of, like never going to the doctor or like looking after, cosmetically looking after yourself, like they got, barely any teeth and stuff like that. Maybe you end up looking older than you really are. But yeah, it's possible that and he's a bit of an intriguing character because he kind of boasts several times about how he was educated, and he actually did work a more conventional job. I think he said he was like an assistant in a lab or something, which I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of taking that with a pinch of salt. Maybe he did that for a week. Maybe he was a janitor there, or maybe he like was like a professional. You can kind of make up your own mind on that front, but he presents it as he made a decision to quit. Like he actually did venture quite far into being maybe closer to normal society. But yeah, it's a bit of an enigma actually, because I think how you sort of judge this, or if you choose to judge it, how you judge this this enterprise of raising your children in that shack, a factor in it that's not answered or really explored at all in this film is like, well, was this kind of a decision that you were really like pioneering by making this decision, or was this kind of more in the wheelhouse of like what you would like, what you just do as your sort of standard default position of your own upbringing and your own culture and stuff like that. So there's a lot to think about in this film. As I said, when you said several times, you'll enjoy it. I was definitely expecting, because I knew it was a documentary. I'm like, okay, it's gonna be like King of Kong or something, or like American Movie, or one of these things where it's a documentary, but it's just a like complete piece of popcorn escapism. And I think what you meant is you'll enjoy it because you like sort of really verite explorations of like childhood and, you know, urban, like, I guess I love Florida Project and stuff like that. Reminded me a bit of Beasts of the Southern Wild. And I did enjoy it, but it was a different type of enjoyment than I had in my head, which is obviously no fault of you, but it's just classic. Like, no matter how little you tell someone about a movie, it's like the brain cogs start turning over and you start, you know, thinking, well, what could it be? I like films, I guess I say films, but I've always been fascinated by this outside of cinema, just in real life. I'm really intrigued by the frontiers between urban and rural environments. I've often taken buses or trains to cities, you know, let's say London, which is, you know, one of the biggest cities in Europe. If you take the bus there or you take the train there, for some of that journey, you're in, you know, complete middle of fucking nowhere. Just as far as you can see all around you, it's just fields. And then by the end of the journey, you're like, you can't even get a whiff of grass for like, you know, miles and miles. You're just, as far as you can see, it's city. But somewhere along the way, there's that moment where you're kind of watching it, and it's a gradient. It's not an overnight step, but it is kind of a bit overnight. There's, as much as it's a gradient, there is a sort of tipping point where you're going, that person in that house lives, they can walk into fields. That person in that house can walk into fields. Oh, now we're done with that. We've just gone, we've passed through a ring road or something, and it's a little abrupt, and it's like, from here on out, it's just city. And because we're from the countryside and we've like spent our lives or our upbringing traveling into cities, not big cities, but nevertheless cities, you know, I'll be always like hitchhiking into Limerick, the local city. And I've just always found that kind of interesting, where it's like you live in a city, but you're looking up at this hill, and of course 10 years later that's been developed and turned into something new. But this film, more than any I can think of, any I can remember, it like explores, I mean literally physically explores the landscape of going from nature into city and back and forth, and that transaction, like he fishes and brings them in a little plastic bag and sells them door to door and stuff. And when their house gets destroyed, they end up going back and like doing menial work within this nature park. Yeah, I don't know why that interests me so much, but I've always liked it, and I still like, I mean, I live in a city now, but it's a small enough city that you can kind of look over the houses and you can see hills, and you know, you can see nature there, and you go, oh, I could, if I wanted to, I could walk over to that nature, and you know, I'd be walking through streets and city, and then I'd eventually be just walking through grass. And you know, I can't explain why that's so interesting to me, because there's not really that much depth to it. It just kind of is what it is. But it's something I find very stimulating, and it's definitely something that's in this movie that caught my eye right from that title shot. What else? Yeah, I mean, I thought the rest of the film kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's sad by the end of it. You've got this oldest kid is now addicted to gambling, which, you know, that's the classic one. I mean, our society obviously has so many ills, doesn't it? It's got like drug addiction and gambling addiction and, you know, like gang violence and I'm just talking about like working class problems, but there's also just like predatory advertising, corporate political oversight, policing, bad neighbors, like if you're living like sardines amongst people, like there's so much bullshit that you have to deal with once you're like saved from the wilderness of living in the fields like these people start off. But then, you know, living out there is also not without its challenges. Like these, are they getting optimum nutrition? You know, like do they have healthcare? I mean, the father mentions that he's got diabetes. He says that the mother is sick. I don't know if she is. I don't know exactly what he means by that, but you know, she might have something quite serious. They're certainly not attending to their ailments, or at least that's not shown in the film. And it's, yeah, I came to the end of the film like feeling quite sad. There's, I suppose, one of the most overtly sad scenes is like right near the end of the film when one of the sons is in tears, just kind of describing how shit his life is now. Like he hates living in the city. He's feeling like his family's being torn apart. He just feels like his quality of life is just disappearing down the drain. And he's really longing for that simple life in the shack. And yeah, it's too complex an issue for me as like a person watching a short documentary sat on a couch to be able to go, and the answer is they should have stayed in the shack and then they would have had a good life. It's not as simple as that, but it does evoke a lot of feeling. And I suppose that's, you know, a good thing when a documentary doesn't necessarily, you don't come away with it with answers, but you come away with it from it with questions. You come away with it from it with feelings. You come away like with empathy, and curiosity about what happens next to these characters. That is a common technique in documentary film, to go back and film the subjects again 10 years later, or however long later. I'd love to see another, I'd love to see a sequel to this. Maybe not yet. It's only been 5 years since the film came out. But, you know, yeah, interesting flick. Probably quite smart on the behalf of the filmmakers to manage to get in with this family before they got relocated. I did have questions about like, were they really living alone, or was there like 20 families out there, or 100 families out there, or 3 families? Like what, like we only see what we never see the Roma community. I think there's like one birthday party where there's a bunch of people there, and there's a few other shots where it seems to be more people on screen than just that family, but the camera never, like the camera almost like deliberately seems to be cutting out, and I could be wrong here, but it feels like they're deliberately filtering out everyone but this family and making it just like hyper focused on this family's journey. Whereas my very little experience with the Roma in Romania has been that they very much operate within a community, and it's like, you know, takes a village to raise a family type thing. So seeing them live in isolation, I'm wondering, is that, to the extent that they are isolated from anyone else as a family, is that movie magic, or are these guys, not only are they isolated from normal society because they're Roma, they're also isolated from the Roma community because of their own choosing? I wonder. But yeah, interesting film. good to get a look. I mean, if you told me that there was a film about a Roma family in Romania, I probably wouldn't think it would have been as interesting as this. And I think what I've found, I said this about Commune, the film we watched recently, and I've said this about a lot of documentaries in the past as a compliment, is less is more. This film doesn't have any talking heads of like historians about the Roma culture in Romania. It doesn't have archive news footage of like migration, or I think like it is very much like right there, down, boots on the ground. We don't, even though we see political figures in the film, so like it's only if they're within the space of those people. It's all shown through their eyes, and I think that's a really compelling way and a really relatable way to show it. So yeah, great film. Also, well, great film might be overstating it, but great to have seen the film. Let me put it that way. And one little tiny little tidbit I'll put in. There's a video game. What's it called? Oh, name is escaping me now. Let me see. I think I've got the soundtrack on vinyl. Norco. That's it. Norco is a video game set in Louisiana, in a sort of, it's a basically a town that is just a mining operation, but of like shell oil or something like that. Not mining, drilling, I think. And this place really exists, and the whole town is just like a corporate creation. But it's, other than that, it's like a rural environment. And it's another great example of this like intermingling of like big infrastructure, big moneyed enterprise side by side with like just swamp dwelling outsiders and locals and stuff like that. And they both kind of require each other, and I don't know, it explores a lot of similar terrain in a weird way, even though it's like, you know, other side of the planet and completely different medium, and they're very, very different in 1,000 ways. But it came to mind a little bit as I was watching this film, and is one of the best games I've played in the last few years. So yeah, I already know that you enjoyed this film. I found it very, very, very enjoyable, or at least felt that I would find it very, very enjoyable. So yeah, be interesting to hear if your thoughts on it deviate from mine. And yeah, any other observations you had about it.
Hey man, it's funny. I went back and listened to my original voice note in our other chat. And I was going to put it in order just for context, to see if anyone ever does listen to this, how much I've led you the wrong way. But there's a subplot of slight dodgy content in that voice note, so I won't be doing that. But just going back to listen to it, it's I mentioned you'll enjoy it once, and then I ended on you'll enjoy it, which probably enunciated big time the word enjoyment, which in your head is sunshine and lollipops, easygoing, fun, crowd pleaser. It's funny, I'm watching this show called The Bureau, the French spy thriller. It's been remade, starring Michael Fassbender. And there's a scene where this young spy asks this older spy, how are you able to lie so well? And then he explains, when someone asks you something, you give away no emotion either way, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether you feel anything towards it at all. And obviously we try and throw movies each other's way to various degrees of quality. It can be something that's a mixed bag, but worth talking about significantly. It can be a decent movie, or it can be an amazing movie. And trying to navigate the language of recommendation is very difficult, because I could have just said, you should watch this movie. But I feel like when you say that, there's so much intrigue that almost builds hype. So what you have to almost do is, you should watch this movie and then just give one line of something, even if it's decent or whatever. I guess the amendment I should now make to my recommendations is, you might want to watch this one by yourself. Because sometimes if you are watching a movie by yourself, you're able to roll with whatever it gives you anyway. Now, you mightn't enjoy it, but if you're watching it with your partner, you're watching with your wife, or watching with a friend, you almost take on their anxieties and take on their restlessness, because you mightn't be restless, but just looking at them and seeing them shift in their space, or going on the dreaded phone, then it can put panic into you settling into the movie. So I'll add a caveat from now on to my 1 or 2 lines of dialogue in trying to give nothing away, and that will be, you might want to watch this by yourself, or you might not. So Acasă, yeah, I like this movie a lot, and I thought you would enjoy it for the reasons you mentioned at the end of your voice note. Something like Beasts of the Southern Wild, the Florida Project, and I guess if it was to be remade into a Hollywood movie, it'd probably be like something akin to, is it Captain Fantastic or something? But I feel like we get a lot of access to questions and a much more comfortable, yet also uncomfortable space to grapple with questions, because of it being a documentary. And it's a documentary that's quite thrilling at times almost, especially in the earlier stages, when it's set up that they are in this delta off Bucharest, I think it is. And you mentioned it's the title shot where we get that drone going upwards. That comes into it after about 10 minutes. So before that, you don't really know where you are geographically. Now, you might recognize the language, you might recognize the ethnicity of the people to some extent, but you don't know where you are. And after 10 minutes of seeing them in their environment, which doesn't particularly look like the Amazon, but it very much could be rural, we get this really nice shot of their camp area, and the camera on the drone rises and rises and rises, and we see their habitat, and then the drone almost pans to this massive city that almost has a wall keeping nature out, and they're very close to it. And I didn't really know where they were to begin with, so that was a massive surprise to me. And also, I think, establishes somewhat of your question, where you're saying is, was there other Romany people around? Was there other settlements? Well, when we get this drone shot, they're very much isolated in their immediate vicinity, and I didn't see any other kind of houses around for what looked like miles. So I would safely say that they're the only ones there, but again, like you say, you don't know for sure. But anyway, that drone shot establishes quite nicely one of the central questions of this movie, well, it's documentary, and that is the almost conflict between the wild and the civilized, both in terms of nature and the way of living. And you almost mused on the point that you often look into the hills or look into the distance, and then you can see green and you can see nature, and then you contemplate walking there, or you think about it and you're very curious as to why, and you've often thought about it, and you give the bus example as well. So I feel like maybe to me and you, it could be one thing that we come from a more rural background, but the other thing is, as a species, we are biologically programmed and adapted to function there better in one way, but then in a social sense and a psychological way, our minds are wired to the civilization we've been brought up in. So there's often things you'll hear from people of, for me, it's going to the beach. I hear the waves and I can't really fully explain why that's such a comforting feeling. Or if I'm by a river, and maybe it's something primal, that river and that sound was the hub of my ancestors' existence and habitat and wildlife center, and then other people have it, they feel at home in a forest, or I think for you it's in the mountains. Well, I think that speaks to something that we've lost on a mental level, but there is remnants of it always going around in our makeup and in us as creatures, because as much as it's more acceptable to be in society, I'm walking around the park now on a concrete road. There's been trees planted here. There's a little bit of grass. It's a lovely park. But at the same time, it was crafted to find a place after being demolished probably about 100 years ago. All the other area around here for brick houses and massive skyscrapers and pollution. And just because we've psychologically adapted to that, it doesn't really mean on a biological level that's where we're meant to be as people. So I really like that aspect to this documentary. We open up, we see this clan almost of boys, and I think there's a few girls there, and they're walking through this, I guess, reeds near this pond slash lake, I guess, and they're pretty wild, but wild in a way that kids should be. Firstly, I often see parents here in cities, and I'm sure you've seen it now that you have kids. Kids inherently are programmed to run around and play and cause mayhem and mischief. They just like doing it. They've got an excessive energy, and you see a lot of parents saying, oh, don't act that way. And a lot of people get bothered by kids being kids. I mean, I'm one of them, but at the same time, I appreciate that they are being kids. I'm just a grumpy old man. He's not even old yet. But there's something about some aspects of the human spirit being stifled that we don't get with these kids early on in this movie. And I think because the family have been there for 20 years, because it's not an indigenous tribe, because it's not something that is almost protected from question, like tribes in various places and whatnot, that's almost accepted as a part of society. But because this is in a place of almost very recently trying to establish that, you can look upon it and criticize it. Not to say criticize it, but you can examine it and think for yourself about the pros and cons. Whereas if you see a tribe in the Amazon, or even how certain cultures are depicted in movies, it's almost a sanitized, holier than thou, romanticized version of it. And I can see why they do it, because those cultures have been fucked around so much. You know, you don't want to give people an excuse, I guess, to, as you said with the colonizers, oh, we need to save you from your awful lifestyle and you savages, and you know, this type of talk. So I can see why it's sanitized in movies. I can, but this unique situation almost allows us to think about these questions more openly without the protection of feeling and perception. If it was to examine people who've lived here for 1,000 years, that would almost be accepted as a full-blown way of life and culture, and it can't be questioned without seeming ignorant or putting your foot in it. But because this is established 18 years ago by the dad and mother in this, I ask you, at what point does something become a culture? Because for the kids, this is all they've known, and it might as well be 1,000 years for them living in this environment, because that's all they know. Now, the parents are a little bit different, and this problem in the documentary Commune, which we watched recently, as you mentioned, has also brought this to the fore. People moved there at their own free will, and a lot of them moved once they had kids, because the kids didn't have a choice at the same level that an adult does. And you mentioned as well that one of the reasons why you wouldn't be a social worker is because it's pretty holier than thou to tell people how to run their lives. Well, I think the only time people are really told how to live their lives is when they have kids, and people start thinking about the protection of them and what's best for them. I think the social workers ain't showing up to that place until they have kids. And in as much as the society in this movie of Romania dictates how they want these people to live, at a certain point, the father becomes the society in a very much smaller scale and dictates how the kids have to live. Now, at the ages they're at, that wouldn't have come up yet because they're quite young. They wouldn't challenge, or like any adult parent, kind of conflict where they pull away from the ways they were raised and try and establish themselves. That happens anyway and anywhere. But in this, most of the kids are at a young age. It's only the older guy, Valley, I think is his name, that the burden of being a young man, he's not even a man yet, is put on him in this area. And certainly when they move away to the city, he is the one who has the most to say. And the lack of love for the lifestyle they lived, mind you, he still goes back there to help and restore the place, and there is a sense of pride in the area. But anyway, yeah, because this is a generally new community and a culture that is very specific to this family, because the most unique and specific culture is your family, we can examine a lot of things, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. The father is not particularly likable. He says some pretty outlandish things. Now, I was trying to make up my mind about the father, but one of the kids says something later on in the documentary where he was never this bad when he lived there. He's completely different. And I think there's a key moment in the documentary where he is told he has to leave this place, and then he goes back and grabs the bottle. Now, whether he was drinking all the time, we don't know. It's documentary magic, as you said, and whether he would be drinking to this level before that is open to interpretation. But let's just see it based on the narrative we're given, and basically backed up by the kid's line of dialogue, that the father is much more functioning in this environment, and the kids don't know any difference, who are having a great time. This is a very good childhood in one sense, and then in another childhood you'd wonder ultimately if this is good or bad. It's not really for us to say. It would be for the kids to say when they're older. They're the only ones who could really make that claim. But the movie doesn't sugarcoat it. They live in a place that is, to my mind, pretty unsanitary, with the pigeons and the animals, and it seems very unhygienic, shall we say. But again, not that this is like for like in any way, but this is some of the stuff that would also come into play for any culture and civilization who live off the acceptable path, shall we say. And then there's the levels of animal cruelty. There's a scene where they essentially grab the pig, and it's a horrible, horrible scene. I'm glad they cut away from it, but I'm also glad that they took the time to show that, because again, when they show cultures hunting and doing things like this, there's almost a type of nobility attached to how it's depicted on camera. There's a type of at one with nature type of thing that they believe it, so it's their reality. But when I'm watching it, it doesn't really align with me. So lots of things they showed in this documentary, minus the commentary, it's almost as is, minus someone telling you this is why we do this, mining a talking head, as you said, saying, well, this is because of this. You just get to see it warts and all, and it does make a more balanced case for what it would be like if you lived in the wild, and what you would have to do, and what your place might look like, and how people might act left alone. The kids are great, they're funny, they're really sweet, and they're having a great time. But then we see them, you know, grabbing a swan. Now, they don't do anything to the swan too much, but at the end of the day, they're tormenting this environment as much as they are part of it at times as well. And you mentioned this very fly on the wall. I would say this is the most, with the footage it's used and the narrative and the way it's put, it's almost like the most non-contrived documentary at times. And I don't put that as a criticism. I put that as one of its blessings and one of its major pluses. For instance, they are shown to live in this place to begin with. At the end of the day, it's their home, and they've lived there longer than anybody. And then it's almost like the intelligentsia, all these so-called wildlife experts, all these type of people, you know, who, I don't know what's the best way to describe it, but it's almost the type. I watched this documentary a few years ago, and it was about this slave ship that was found, and all this family lived in, like the descendants lived in, I think it was a part in America. And basically this history guy who was really into the history of it, who was this white guy, and he's explaining while all the relatives there whose family went through horrific stuff historically, and the historian goes, and this is a reconstruction of the ship on that fateful night. Like he's making it sound like a Disney movie on this fateful night where they were like, what do you mean this fateful night? Why are you trying to put some narrative fucking storytelling on this? Do you mean when they were grabbed in chains and fucking kidnapped to America? And you know, this type of people who, I don't know what the best way to put it, but you know what I mean. The region starts getting filled with these people, and you can see the level of disdain they have for the family that lived there. And there's a great conflict between the guy who lived there and these people who show up to almost, I guess, sanitize the area and give it a type of artistic spiel. Look at this place, and it's carefully curated, carefully manufactured, and carefully propaganded, I suppose is the best way of putting it. This is a stop on the tourist board of our lovely Romanian city. That's the best way of describing those type of people. And you know who doesn't have a place there? These type of people who have a rough edge. And I think how the movie frames it in these early stages is brilliant, because we have people coming to look at nature and looking at this environment that people have come back and helped to manufacture into an acceptable environment. And then we have this man walking around it who, this isn't just a carefully crafted place. This is his home, and this is his environment in a much more real sense than the people who've come there to look at this area as a day out from the city and have their sandwiches, you know. And this is why I say it's the most contrived, non-contrived documentary at times, because we get these great shots of this guy walking around, the father figure, like a ghost in his own home, because again, this is his place. He's been here for a long time, and now there's people there on loads of bikes. There's people there explaining stuff, being very rude to him. And then we get Prince Charles coming around, and we get this great shot where Prince Charles is there and the politician is there, and our main man, the dad, is there. And it's just brilliant storytelling without having to tell the story in a traditional way. We see that juxtaposition of shots, and we see that conflict, and we see Prince Charles there to, I think, say hi to a flower or something. And then we realize that the pomp and circumstance has now arrived at this place, and there's no room for these people, and it frames it as, not to say a working class story, but you know, stories like The Field, or is it that's not Gregory's Girl. There's some Scottish movie where, you know, where these corporations come to take over and corrupt this small town, those type of movies. This is like the nature version of this story, where all these people have come to look at this area, and yet they're looking past the community that lives there. I think the framework of that is very good, and very good documentary filmmaking, and just gets you angry, to be honest. And then, of course, eventually, maybe halfway through the documentary, I don't know, they have to go to society. And I think a lot of the reason why these questions are raised as well is because they're set on the footsteps of Bucharest and total quote-unquote civilization, that the contrast between their lifestyles is called even more into question. And then when they go there, we don't get any easy answers there either, because the kids are enjoying it to begin with. There's this great moment where this kid gets his hair cut, and he's smiling and he's happy. And then I couldn't help thinking of when the Native Americans had to go into schools and they had to get their hair cut. Now, probably their hair being cut is very culturally significant to them, so for them to have to assimilate in that way would have been horrifying. But again, because these people are almost semi-indigenous, or at least the kids are, to see the contrast and no easy answers with the kids smiling, whereas for other cultures, that same scene would be barbaric. It again gives us no easy answers, and so the kids are enjoying themselves early on, it seems. And again, you're thinking, no, maybe they are better off. Maybe now that they're here, it was the right decision, and you're constantly trying to figure that out, which, as you said, with documentaries that give you no easy answers, just make you think a lot, and that's brilliant. And after a while, we see the horrors of our society as well, with all the kids sat around a TV, or is it a laptop. We see the family unit dissolve, because for however close they were in the Delta, especially the siblings, that starts to get a little bit more fractured in terms of viewpoints. And even when you see them try and hang out with other people, they don't really know how to do it in the same way that they do as their clan. And then we see them trying to balance their wild tendencies by our standards in society. And then you think, well, how they've been raised as a part of them now, and this society has no place for you because you need to assimilate. And when they're fishing in the river, they're running across water trying to swim, because again, this is part of their culture, of what they were brought up on. This is part of who they are, but there's no place for that here. And when the police punch them, and they've just got no tolerance for them in that environment. And then again, they eventually end up in an even worse place, because they can't really look after the place where they live. And it's not like they looked after the place where they lived in the wild by their standards, but it wasn't affecting anyone. There was no landlord to come in and look at the place, at least for a while. And then we see poor Valley getting addicted to gambling, and he has a kid on the way, which they do eventually have if you stay for a little bit of the credits. And he mentioned the dad, who says, I think the kid says to the dad, well, if you had a kid at our age. But I feel like that might have been the kid who no longer lives there, or that might have been the kid who didn't come to live with him in that place. We would just presume was part of the clan and the children that we see. But he is certainly an enigma, the dad figure. And I found him a very fascinating character in how he describes himself, that I had an education, I had this and that, and how he comes into conflict with the people in the park. He's not likable in how he does it. He's very much a pain in how he does it. But again, I'm always rooting for the underdog in these situations. So yeah, a lot to really like about this movie on an intellectual level, on a philosophical level, and also I just thought in how it plays out in terms of the social services coming, the family hiding, and their essential habitat being chopped down, like how the Amazon is chopped down for natives who live there, in a very microcosm sense. In this movie, I found it very affecting, I suppose. And you mentioned that this movie stops in 2020. Well, I wonder, was there more to film? It doesn't seem like that. It seems like it ended on a place where it should end. But I wonder, did it stop because of COVID restrictions, or was this all wrapped up before the COVID restrictions? I don't know, but yeah, it's a sign of a good documentary where you would like to see where these people are in another 10 years, and you hope that they are in a better place in terms of where they feel their place is. Because as you mentioned, we got that great scene where that poor kid is crying, saying he'd love to go back to his shack and he'd love to live there and he'd go back right now. And that brings it back to how I feel about how you're meant to feel about movies like this, and documentaries, should I say. I think ask the people who were there how they feel about the experience, and it will tell you if it was a good idea or a bad idea.
Hey man, sorry, I thought I'd actually responded to you the other day. I listened to your voice message, but life's been a bit hectic. Yeah, glad to hear you like this movie. I mean, it was kind of implied by the fact that you told me to watch it and told me I'd enjoy it, so it'd be a hell of a twist if you turned around and said you hated it. But yeah, watching it is very recognizably up your street. I think you love well, you love, like me, you love like kind of on the ground impressionistic depictions of life in general, but I think children's lives is particularly compelling. And then you also love sort of living off the land, sort of surviving in nature. I mean, this isn't Bear Grylls stuff, but it is definitely, like you said, the first 10 minutes of the movie, it could be the Amazon that you're in. I mean, I think that's very deliberately structured that way, but I appreciated it. My suspicion was that we were in Romania with Roma people, but certainly could have been proven wrong. So yeah, I think there's a lot in this film that is sort of shared interests of both of us, and I think there maybe is just a touch more that is in your wheelhouse. Of course, I was going into it with this you're going to enjoy it rhetoric, which had me anticipating Ocean's 11 or something. But I think it, like you said, it's borderline impossible to get someone to watch a movie, but have them just be completely clean in the experience. I think we are some of the rare people that could actually pull that off, because we both have so much faith in each other's recommendations that I think we could, at this point, probably just have a system of like, you just write the name of the movie and that's it. Like, just, you know, don't say you should watch this or anything. I'm not, you know, maybe this is overly high maintenance, but I think we probably got to that point. Just like drop a voice note to the other one and be like, this is a voice note about Acasă. Therefore, the other person goes and watches it. I mean, there is definitely movies that I'll put your way that I think are outside of your wheelhouse, like horror specifically, and maybe I'm like, you know, trying to grease the wheels a little bit and say, okay, watch it when you want something like this. But yeah, I think most movies, the blinder you are, the better. I'm struggling to remember what you said in your voice note, but I think one thing you discussed was like how there's that difference. It came up in our discussion about commune as well, that difference between people who've moved there, chosen voluntarily to move there, and kids that are from there. And like you said, they might as well have been there for 1,000 years. I mean, of course, they're not. It's a weird thing because, as you said, we get this massive big drone shot and we can see that there's no other shacks immediately close to them. There may be no other people living like this in this entire area. Difficult to say, really, because it's described as the biggest natural park, the biggest nature reserve or something like that in the EU. So I can imagine that it goes on quite far, and there may be other people living in it, especially given how many Roma people live in Romania. But it seems like it's certainly presented in this movie, and if we just sort of take it on face value, it's presented in this movie as being a lifestyle choice that's unique to this family, as opposed to this is kind of what this culture does. I just have my morning cuppa now. which is kind of rings true to my own very anecdotal and limited personal experience of being in Romania and seeing the Roma people pretty much always living in communities as opposed to in isolation. So you could say that they, like you said, the kids, because they know nothing else, it's like they might as well have been there for thousands of years. I mean, on the other hand, it's like, well, there's more that you get culturally than just what your family does. Like if you are literally growing up in some like mountain village where there's generations and generations of people that have been living there for thousands of years, and that's different, I suppose. But it's definitely something I thought about, especially because we see a span of 9 kids, and I think I shared your suspicion that maybe this was a new family. I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's kind of what I interpreted. Like this guy, yes, he's had these 9 kids, but maybe he's had other families in the past, because he definitely looks a bit too old to be just like 35 or whatever age he would be if he did start having kids when he was 18, and that 18-year-old is his oldest kid. But yeah, I was thinking about a lot, like the span of the age of the kids, and you've got this kid who leaves the environment when he's 17, who's the main kid that they profile. I say kid, but he's essentially a young man. And then you've got the little girl, I think she's 4. Now she looks younger than 4. She looks like she's more like 2 or something, or 3, but maybe she's 4. So if they are indeed going to be embedded for the rest of their life in mainstream society, which is my placeholder term that I'm using for just like the way we live, then the 17-year-old is going to have all of his childhood memories coming from this, living in this swamp. And the 4-year-old is going to have none of their childhood memories. I mean, if you think, I don't know, like how far my memory's terrible anyway, but like I was born in Dublin, but I lived in Wales till I was 3. And then I lived in Scotland till I was 5. And then I moved to Ireland when I was 5. And those 3 years in Wales, I can't remember that. I mean, like I can remember there was a little boy that lived next, I don't know if he lived next door literally, but he was a neighbor. And I know now, being a father, that like other little kid in vicinity that I can play with or just be aware of and like wave to and stuff like that is like a huge fucking totem of your existence. So now it makes sense that I remember that kid, like his presence, vaguely what he looked like. Now, some of that could be genuine memories, and some of it could be like, well, maybe when I was 7 or 10 or something, I saw photos of him, or his existence was kind of like relayed to me again. But it's very scattershot. So I would imagine that this little 4-year-old girl will have limited to non-existent memories of this part of her childhood. Doesn't mean it won't have an enormous impact. It may be something that is a huge part of what's formed her character even when she's in her 60s, but it's going to be so different for those kids in terms of how they felt that they're an outside. You know, there's all these stories like Pocahontas, which is a true story, but also like Tarzan and stuff, where they'll take a person from living in nature and then bring them into so-called civilized society. And for the older ones, now they were living right outside Bucharest and they were going in and selling the fish. And again, it's movie magic. We don't know how involved they were in standard urban life. They may have been more involved than the movie suggests, but they're going to probably, especially the oldest one, have their whole life be this thing of like, I'm not from here. I'm sort of an outsider to here. And then the younger ones are going to be like, it's almost just like something I've been told about that I used to live here. So I thought that was kind of interesting to think about. And there's a lot in this film that's interesting to think about beyond kind of what's in the movie. Like I mentioned that this film was released in 2020. Pandemic starts in 2020. it's the most transformative period of our lives. I know it's not by any means the most transformative period of history, but in terms of like first world, Western Europe, or any part of Europe, it's the most transformative period of our lives in terms of your relationship with your home, the way it is to live within your environment, your city or your country, whatever. Like it's so much of the themes that one would be discussing were one to make a documentary about the pandemic are the themes in this movie, like from a completely different angle, but still. You said that you felt like this film sort of ended when it should, like it did. It's a fair and logical ending to it. It didn't need anything more, and I completely agree. And I'd imagine that they stopped shooting at the absolute latest 2019. But like I said, it could be way before then. I mean, being vaguely involved in some documentary film projects, and I know quite a few documentary filmmakers, and they from when they finish filming, there's often a very, very long period before like it's ending up on the likes of Netflix or wherever, like years, both of post-production and of just shopping it around. And even the filming of it is very often years and years. So it's an extended process. I highly doubt that this came anywhere close to the pandemic in terms of the filming of it, because at the end of the movie, the last thing we see is this older boy with his baby, and the baby looks newborn. So that's kind of right after. I mean, that's like only at the absolute maximum 9 months after those conversations he's having with his girlfriend. But yeah, so it's not like everything we see in the movie is sort of contained within a couple of years, it looks like. But as much as I agree, like the film is closed. It's a logical place to end it. It's also incredibly logical to make a sequel to this set in the pandemic. It would also be incredibly, and this, I don't mean to come across as glib here, but it would be fortunate had they still been filming when the pandemic set in and they'd captured that, because I know that would have completely changed what the movie was, and it is a self-contained film, and that's fine. If you're already embedded with a family, having captured loads of interesting material on how comfortable they feel in their home, isolation away from society, like what are their limitations, everything that this film discusses and this film captures. If you then turn that into a pandemic movie. Now, I know that's wholesale throwing at this film, and obviously you feel very strongly about this film, so you're probably not like intuitively like the idea of like completely getting rid of this film and making a completely different film. But I'm just thinking that this could have been a really interesting lead in. Like if everything we see in this film was just the first 40 minutes, and then it goes through the pandemic and then the aftermath or something, and then they're in adulthood, and you're probably of the persuasion of like, okay, I think this film is like, this should be the film, and I don't want it to be a pandemic film. But at the very least, I think it would be very interesting to see a sequel to this, which I'm sure doesn't exist because probably would have come out by now, but an immediate sequel that's following this family through the pandemic. Because as I said, pandemic, very interesting period in history, very undocumented period in history. Like if you think about the amount of, I'm not trying to say that the pandemic was as important an event as like World War II or something, but as soon as World War II ended, there was just like hundreds and hundreds of movies and novels and stuff about it. And the pandemic's kind of, it's almost just like it's been and gone, and like we just don't even acknowledge that it ever happened. So I think although there's loads of interesting documentaries and stuff that could be made about the pandemic, I think the opportunity for a documentary film crew to be embedded with a family that's already one of the sort of disenfranchised members of society, and they're making a documentary about the nature of home and living within a society and an urban environment and stuff like that. you really have a lot. You're teed up for making quite an interesting documentary. But in any case, I'd like to see a sequel to this 10 years down the line or however long, because it is just intriguing, kind of wondering, where did these guys go? Like, what happened to them? And then just one last little point. You mentioned that in my voicemail, I'd said that like being a social worker is like a holier than thou position. I certainly didn't mean to come across that way. I don't think being a social worker is remotely holier than thou. When I said I wouldn't want to take on the management of someone else's life, that wasn't me saying because I think it's arrogant to do so. That was me saying I think it's an immense responsibility, and it's very incredibly intimidating, and I would feel like racked with anxiety about doing that job well. Before I had kids, the biggest things that I had to manage were just like my own, in the grand scheme of things, quite trivial little mechanisms of my life. And if I fuck something up, oh, maybe I'd like miss a flight or, get fired from a job, and would be a sort of worst case scenario. That was like the extent to which I was like ever playing with fire. For the most part, it was just like, oh, maybe I'd like drop a cup and it would smash. When I had kids, it was like, okay, this is hardcore. Like I could really fucking damage these kids if I like physically. I could, be not concentrating and cross the road when it's a red light and we get hit or something like that. But also just like mentally, I could like teach them bad lessons, or I could get angry and shout at them and just be an asshole. And like it was such a upgrade in the responsibility I had, which obviously is, everyone knows that. I think being like managing the lives of people that are in a very difficult place, like extreme substance abuse, sexual abuse, massive mental health disorders, huge, like coming from communities like rife with like crime and all sorts of like really intense problems, and with no simple easy answers, no black and white, all gray areas, all incredibly complicated systems that, or situations that when you hear about them and you hear all the particulars of it, you're like, Jesus, I don't really know what the right thing to do is in that situation. And then doing all of that within the prism of limited resources, and like bureaucracy and everything like that is just like the biggest fucking nightmare job. And of course, incredibly admirable, because you have the opportunity to bring about really, really valuable assistance to people and make their lives either a tiny bit better, or I suppose in some rare cases, like really transform their lives for the better. Getting that right or getting that wrong would be a fucking huge toll. I think it's significantly more stressful and challenging than doing like surgery or something, where like you sometimes get it wrong and a patient dies or something. I mean, that is like a very scientific, this is exactly the problem, this is exactly the correct approach, how dexterous and how knowledgeable are you? Whereas when it comes to like the messiness and chaos of people's lives and the like generational trauma and everything that's going on, that is something that's way, way harder to interact with, even if you have personal experience within those realms, which I don't. So don't mean to say that social workers have a holier than thou attitude. I just think that they have a responsibility and a burden that I do not envy. And I, as much as I, love the idea of helping people, it's a very hard thing to do. Maybe I could do something like be a teacher or something, because we see different levels of challenges, if you will, in this movie. We see like young kids who are just like you said, the scene with the kid getting the haircut, or some of the scenes in school and stuff. Well, you can kind of, this is still a young kid that can be molded and can be helped and can be, you can get on their good side and charm them and stuff like that. But then you've got like, how do you change the lives of the adults in this movie? How do you how do you even bring about change in your own self as an adult, which is fucking practically impossible, but in another person. So yeah, it's a glimpse into a challenging world, and this film doesn't have that much super heavy content. We have, like, you know, the beginnings of gambling addiction at the end, but we never really go into, I mean, if you told someone what this film was about and you didn't tell them kind of what happens in it, they might imagine that the film would have way heavier content in, you know, sexual abuse, drug abuse, that kind of stuff. It doesn't really have anything like that. And I don't know if that's because it just wasn't present at all, or if the film is like trying to be a bit more focused in what it's detailing. But anyway, again, I think it's a good movie. And it inspires a lot of curiosity, and it inspires a lot of discussion, which I think is always a good outcome of any documentary.
Not much at all to add to anything you said, other than I think there's going to be loads of pandemic movies and documentaries coming out over the next few years. And I'm pretty sure there's been so many pandemic movies already where they're not set during the pandemic, but filmed during the pandemic. And it's almost designed to hide that. I know Eddington, the new Ari Aster movie, is set during the pandemic as well. So I'm almost glad in a way that this movie doesn't become dated by a historical event and it becomes a much more broader issue. Now, I totally agree that part 2 set during the pandemic would be good, but I don't want this dirty myths anywhere near this movie. And I love the way you mentioned Bear Grylls. This is not some Bear Grylls stuff. Bear Grylls is the ultimate charlatan. He's been caught ordering Dominoes when he's meant to be in the wild. So these people are way more legit than Bear Grylls, let me tell you. Just one final thought I had. Funny, like, we've known each other since 14? What's that? 24, 30, like 16 years now? No, 26. Well, nah, it's got to be more than 16 years. 26. Yeah, 26 years. Jesus. So yeah, we've known each other 26 years. And these are the things I found out about you through talking to you solely about movies. That you lived in Wales, that you lived in Scotland, that your dad is from London, that you often thought of being a social worker. So and probably more stuff as well, but this is just from the last few conversations we had. So I look forward to finding out more about you when we talk about movies.
Yeah, if you want to know all the details of my life, you're going to have to select the right movies to tease out the little nuggets. I think, like, I don't know how many hours we've spoken to each other in the 25 plus years that we've been friends, but you know, thousands and thousands of hours, hundreds of thousands of hours, who knows how much. And I'd love to see what percentage of that has been about either film, TV, or football. I mean, the percentage must be staggering. It could be 96% or something. Other than that, you know, my name, my gender, like, you know what city I live in. But yeah, it's funny. Like, there's even things that are, I mean, me living in Wales is like a you know, many decades old thing that I barely even remember myself. I mean, Wales is as foreign a country to me as it is to you, even though I actually live walking distance from it right now. But there's other things that are huge parts of my life, like my taste in music and the music I listen to, that I like is like an obsession of mine, and I'm like every day kind of consumed by it. But we never ever talk about music, so it's just funny how narrow relationships can be. And also on the pandemic thing, like, yeah, I mean films that are about the pandemic and are about COVID, not films like The Lost Daughter, for example, where you watch the film and you're like, okay, clearly this was made during the pandemic. It's got no extras. It's got like 4 cast members or whatever. I think, yeah, I'm basically talking about films like Eddington, where either they're a fiction film or they're a documentary film, but the pandemic actually is a feature of the film. Like you said, maybe they don't want things to be dated, considering it was like, it's one of the only completely global events that's ever happened and like involved almost every human on Earth. It's weird that instead of getting like thousands and thousands and thousands of pandemic movies right now, you can probably count on 1 or 2 hands the films that you're aware that have kind of come out and got any kind of discussion or popularity or higher profile that are at all about the pandemic. So maybe they're coming, like you said, but it's been a long time that they've had to start releasing these movies, and I think it's such a fascinating and interesting time. Yeah, I did guess correctly that you would hate to see the pandemic come into this film. I think that could have been very interesting, but anyway, it's a very interesting film as it is, and whether the makers of this film go on to make a sequel or just like other documentaries about the same subject, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I do think the filmmaking is very good, but it's not necessarily to the point where I'm like, these guys can make a documentary about anything. I'm here for it. It's more like they were really smart with realizing that this family was about to get displaced and embedded themselves with the family in this quite a unique and interesting lifestyle. And then, they were there for that whole arc. And I think they did well. They did their job really well. They captured it well. I love the impressionistic vibe of it. I love the kind of it's atmospheric. It's so much. Really, the best parts of this movie for me were just like one of the kids just sort of sat quietly, contemplatively, looking at the expressions on their face. You got the sense of literally the environment, like the wind, the ambience. And so I think it is a good film from a filmmaking perspective, but when this wraps and they have to start from scratch again and come up with a whole new idea and a whole new focus and everything, I wouldn't necessarily be like overly high confidence about the next film being as compelling, because I think, this is just very, very interesting subject matter and really good subjects, because they're very, very likable. I mean, the father is less likable, but the kids are very likable, and the father's interesting as well. He's quite enigmatic. So they had a fair bit to work with here, and I think they did a good job. Maybe they've already made another film, whoever made this, because it came out half a decade ago, and it may have finished post-production 7 years ago. I don't know. So sometimes these things take a while to end up being distributed. But yeah, interesting flick. And on to the next one.
Your mailbox is full. Please delete new or stored messages which you no longer need so that new messages may be received.